some time for questions, so not speeches, questions. We're very fortunate to have the Senator here, so who wants to get started? Right there.
Thank you for coming and for talking to us. I'm here representing the Immigration Advocacy and Support Center based in London. But my question is going to be on what I think is a much more fundamental issue that's a big cause of the deadlock in Washington now, which is the gerrymandering in so many states. And I believe there are three. I think Ohio is one of them, where the federal government has actually been able to say you've got to have justified districts, and they're refusing to do it. Does the federal government have any authority to come in and make states obey the law?
It does have authority. The question is about gerrymandering that may be racially biased, if I'm understanding the question correctly. Yes, it does. Under the Civil Rights Acts, it has. And the Supreme Court has hobbled that effort to some extent. There are cases right now ongoing in the federal courts involving interpretation of those laws. I'm hoping that the Supreme Court will continue to put the federal government on the side of adequate, fair representation, and rather than use the word gerrymandering, in other words, redistricting in a way that restricts rights by confining votes in certain districts where certain races may be overly represented so that they don't have the power that they should. It's a complicated area, but I think reform is necessary. And by the way, I think reform is necessary also in the United States Congress. You know, I've been in favor of abolishing the filibuster, which often is in the way of getting things done, and also the ability of a single senator to put a hold on nomination. As you all know, Senator Tuberville is blocking all of the confirmation of, now it's almost 400 or more, nominations to some of the top ranks in our military. 9 of the top positions in CENTCOM, the Central Command, which has responsibility for the Middle East, Israel, 9 of those top positions are vacant because of the hold that he's put on those nominations. So this issue of reforming our government is very important.
So my question is more germane to the health of our community. I'm an oncologist, and what I see is a lot of network integration in the state of Connecticut, with 2 health systems taking over and wiping out private practices. And a lot of it has to do with the policies that have come out of Washington, D.C., which include 340B side of service, PBMs, etc. What are you thinking about, and what are you looking at when it comes to that center?
Great question. Consolidation. You know, there was a time, I think Connecticut had 23 separate hospitals. Separate, independent, nonprofit hospital. And now we have three major hospital chains. And they are, as you observe correctly, buying up local practices. And the consolidation, obviously, that's not the only industry where there's been consolidation. Airlines, electricity, you can go down the list of industries where there's been that kind of consolidation. And in big tech, there's a lawsuit ongoing right now, Department of Justice against Google, because it has squashed competition by either buying potential startups before they really get going, or doing what they do and so undercutting their price, because they have the economic power to do it, that they can drive them out of business. And I think, to answer your question very directly, there has to be stronger use of our antitrust laws to preserve competition. When I was Attorney General, and I did that job for 20 years, I did antitrust cases. We sued Microsoft. We sued some of the pharmaceutical drug producers that would abuse the patent laws to keep competitors out of their businesses. I think the antitrust laws need to be used more aggressively, but also I think some of the perverse incentives, and I think you had those in mind when you asked the question, incentives that seem to reward the consolidation rather than preserve competition. Now, there are economies of scale, no question about it, and the hospitals have arguments to make about economies of scale, cost saving, but I don't think too many people in this room have seen any dramatic reductions in the cost of medical care these days. Just the opposite. So I think we need to focus on how competition, how more access to health care from more sources can better promote not only lower prices, but also possibly innovation and better care.
Yes, thank you. I'm Denise Davies, the CEO for Sarah Inc., and we're the largest nonprofit in the state for early intervention services, or also known as Virtuous Green. And through years of chronic underfunding at both the federal and state level, we cannot get and keep the staff we need to get to children and families. So what's happening is in a very special age range, children are losing that potential that they could realize. That's our future workforce. And the current Department of Education FY24 budget does have some additional funding for IDEA Part C, which funds early intervention. And I just wanted to ask you about your commitment and the other senators and House of Representatives' commitment to keeping this money, because it is discretionary, and we're all concerned it's going to be on the top of the line.
To answer your question very directly, first, those children are our future. They may not be in the workforce pipeline right now, but they will be very soon, and the quality of their learning at that age bears directly on how effective they're going to be as workers. And yes, I am committed to that program. I think our entire delegation is. I don't want to speak for others, but we have been strongly supportive in the past. And if you want to catch me afterward, we can talk about some of the details.
Good afternoon. Rodney Alexander, First Vice President of Willimantic branch of the NAACP, along with Town Councilman out of Willimantic. My question is, Senator, what are we doing to help cities like Willimantic who have lost, not losing, but lost maternity wards? What can the state do to make up for this? Because quiet as it kept, I honestly believe it's a systemic practice being practiced, systemic discrimination policies that are being practiced, and also, this is how you break a small city from expanding. Because how can you convince anybody to move to a city where there's no OB-GYN services for the families? Thank you.
You know, I have opposed the termination of the OB-GYN delivery practices, not only in Eastern Connecticut, but it's also an ongoing issue in Sharon, Connecticut. You mentioned it, so I'm going to respond specifically. Making women travel an hour when they're about to give birth. My expertise is based on having 4 children, and it's limited expertise, but I do know that that ride to the hospital has to be shorter, not longer. And the availability of care has to be there, prenatal care, so that it is accessible and convenient. That's just one example of how rural America, and I know Willimantic is not rural in the sense of necessarily the way Western communities may be regarded as rural, but small communities have to be given attention in terms of healthcare, education, so that we invest in them, because the quality of life there is often so great, and if those services are not available, people can't live there comfortably. So I'd be glad to talk to you some more about what we're doing. We're becoming more and more aware and focused on rural and small-town America.
Good afternoon. Thank you for showing up, and I hope your family in Israel is going to be safe and sound.
Thank you.
My name's Gary McKeon. I'm normally on the other side of everything that you stand for. I'll be very upfront and honest. Over the last 48 hours, we've seen massive protests throughout the country, including our state facility at UConn, and they were supporting Hamas and the other state over there, what was it?
Hezbollah.
You haven't come out and condemned them. You've condemned everything when there's other protests going on against, and again, no disrespect to anybody, Black Lives Matter, okay, and Back to Blue. You and our other elected officials are on that side. Why don't you stand up and condemn these protests supporting Hezbollah? And even down in Washington, we have elected officials that are standing there. They have flags outside of their rooms, which is absolutely disgusting. But then again, we hear crickets, to be honest, from you.
I have very forthrightly condemned support for Hamas.
In public?
In public.
No, I'm not talking
And-
about Hamas. I'm talking about the protests and your counterparts in Washington that are supporting or wavering on this. We need you to stand up and say, this is unacceptable. We're America and we're supporting these people. Because it sounds like we have people down there that are supporting different sides, and I get that. Everybody has their own. But you're our senator. Clearly, there's a clearly defined line here.
Let me just, I don't mean to cut you off, but you know, this is very personal to me.
I know that.
And I want to be absolutely clear. There is no room here for a gray area. I hope Americans will condemn Hamas. I hope our colleges and universities will take strong stands to uphold the right of Israel to exist and to defend itself. I've been critical of colleagues who may express themselves in ways that could easily be regarded as anti-Semitic, and demonstrations that smack of anti-Semitism. There is no room in this country for white supremacy, anti-Muslim, anti-Semitic kinds of threats to our basic rule of law and our values. And you may not have seen me quoted. I may not have been quoted in the papers that you read, but just in case there's any doubt in this room, I think our universities and colleges need to take a stronger stand. I think our political leaders should be taking strong stands, as I have done. And let me also be very clear, this war is not against the Palestinian people. It is a war against a terrorist organization. And I want to be also clear, I'm not in favor of restricting the First Amendment just because it's a view that I find abhorrent and outrageous. They have a right to say whatever they want, and I have a right to condemn that point of view. And that's what I'm doing.
Peter.
With all of the atrocities that are going on in the world, the arts managed to give us joy and lightness in our hearts. My name is Peter Lyman, and I'm a founding member and past president for many years of the Norwich Arts Center. NAC was founded with financial help from the city of Norwich and the state of Connecticut through what at that time was called the Connecticut Commission on the Arts. This ongoing funding enabled NAC to hire an executive director. Approximately 20 years ago, our funding ceased, and NAC became a struggling, all-volunteer organization. My question to you, Senator, is, do you see any time in the future when ongoing support funding for the arts will be available to cities such as Norwich and similar cities. Throughout history, economic development has flourished when the arts have been strong, and the arts have flourished when the economy has thrived. Do you have any suggestions?
I have strongly supported funding for the arts, educational funding for the arts in schools, as well as for organizations like yours. I'll continue to do it. You know, we haven't mentioned it here, but I just want to be really blunt with all of you. Our national debt now is pretty high and going higher. So I just want to be on record as caring about fiscal responsibility here, but the arts are important. You know, one of the great resources we have in this state, and Mark Brown is here, and I don't know whether others from our tribal nations, but the source of art and cultural enrichment that we get from our two great tribal nations are immensely valuable in drawing people to come to this state and visit. The arts have an economic implication. They have a great value wholly apart from the aesthetic impact. And so we need to be mindful of it and invest in it. So I'm glad that you mentioned that point. And I know that we're nearing the close, and I think I can't remember exactly how you put it, a little hope and light. You know, on Fridays, one of my favorite things to do is to go to our courthouses where there are immigration and naturalization ceremonies. I don't know how many of you have been to one. Chances are that most of your ancestors, or maybe you yourself, have gone through it. People come there on Fridays. They are sworn in as United States citizens. They come from all over the world. Every session, there are usually 2 or 3 every Friday. 20, 30, 60 people. Ukraine, China, Great Britain, Canada, Argentina, you name a country, maybe not all in the same day, but they're from all over. I guarantee you, they're not doing immigration and naturalization ceremonies in China or Russia. People want to come here because we are the land of opportunity and freedom. And we may have our differences. We have our differences. But what brings us together is so much more important than what divides us. And I try to keep that in mind every day when I'm in Washington. There's all the division and sometimes viciousness that you see, and I see it up close and personal. Because those people who come here, they know the value of America, and they're not putting America down, they're lifting it up, and their talent and energy is part of what makes America great. We're a nation of immigrants. And we're very fortunate to have Native American, indigenous populations who have provided a foundation for this great nation. But the majority of Americans have immigrant stories somewhere in their past. My dad came here in 1935. He was 17 years old. He spoke virtually no English. He had not much more than a shirt on his back. And he knew no one. This country gave him a chance to succeed. He came alone at 17 years old. And it was just before the Holocaust. He brought over his 3 siblings and his parents, and the rest of his family perished. And one of his siblings, his sister, went to Israel. And she married, she had children. That family is still in Israel. And they are under threat now. But in America, we are safe. and we are free. And that's why people prize American citizenship. So I know that I may have sounded despondent and despairing, but just the opposite. I am more hopeful than ever. When I see young people who apply to my office for nominations to our military academies, when I meet our troops around the world, when I see our diplomats in places like Ukraine, they are literally under bombardment every day, our diplomats. When I see public servants at the local level, people like yourselves who give back to the community, that makes me really hopeful. So as much as we may be critical, let's keep in mind all the good that we have. I know I sound a little preachy, but you know, that's what U.S. senators do sometimes. So, thank you all.
That was a great note to end on, Senator. Thank you so much. A little known fact, the population of Connecticut is 3.6 million people. 600,000 of that number were born in another country.
That's amazing.
That's a lot. So anyway, look at folks. Again, thank you to our sponsors, Norwich Public Utilities. Chris, thank you so much for everything you do for the region. SCAD, Stacy, thank you so much for everything SCAD does to keep a lot of people healthy. And Becky, didn't mention this earlier, I don't think, is the Director of External Affairs for Southwest Wind. Thank you, Becky, for your support. Really appreciate it. And thank you all for being here. Have a great day.